When you're studying ecology, you can study a population, which is a group of the same species. You can study a community, which is a group of different species, and look at how the living things interact. So you might be studying pollination, you might be studying predator-prey, or you can study an ecosystem, and an ecosystem is going to look at the biotic factors, so the living things, and the abiotic factors, the non-living things. Be careful with abiotic. So a seed is dormant. It's made of cells, and so it's really considered a biotic factor. Abiotic factors are really going to refer to things that are not living and not made of cells. So things like water, temperature, wind, soil, but keep in mind, in soil, you might find bacteria and fungus and other organisms. So if you're hearing abiotic or you're asked to describe abiotic, you always want to choose things that are very comfortably not living. And so that's really referred to as the environment. And so when we study an ecosystem, we're really studying how the particular conditions of that environment. So we might consider things like climate. Climate, of course, will have components such as temperature, precipitation, wind, and keep in mind that climates are going to happen in cyclical patterns because the Earth is tilted on its axis. And as the Earth rotates, that's of course a day, so we're going to have daily or circadian rhythms and patterns. And then we're going to have other patterns such as month, which is how often the moon rotates around the sun, and we have our tides. And then you're also going to have how often the Earth rotates around the sun in its orbit, and that will give you your yearly cycles. And because the Earth is tilted, and that tilt is going to affect how much sunlight, how much direct radiation hits the Earth, we're also going to see these yearly patterns. So climate is a big part of an ecosystem. And then you're going to see other non-living factors such as the like river or the type of rock or the type of soil. And then you are also going to see living things. An ecosystem is usually a contained area, a contained or defined area. Two really important terms to be able to use when we talk about abiotic. We are going to really, when we study abiotic factors, we're going to look at things like matter. So this might be carbon or hydrogen or nitrogen or oxygen, and we are going to also look at energy. Matter is really going to cycle. So matter is neither created nor destroyed. It's just really going to be transferred. And so we're going to look at a couple cycles real quickly. The water cycle, this would be a good time to go back and review the properties of water. So the idea of the polar molecule, and because the molecule is polar, we are going to have hydrogen bonds happening, and so water doesn't usually exist in a gaseous form. It's mainly going to be liquid because of those intermolecular bonds that happen between the different molecules of water. So we see water in a liquid form very often here on Earth at the temperature most likely on Earth. But we will see water evaporate. As water cools, it will condense and then fall as precipitation. That precipitation will either run off along the land or get absorbed into the soil and become part of the groundwater. So most people are able to kind of talk about the main ideas of the water cycle. The two ones that are really important for us are transpiration, which is the evaporation of water from plants and from their stomata. And that is a really important property that helps plants transport water. A unique thing that we do need to mention is the idea of fresh water versus salt water. Glaciers are actually a reservoir for fresh water, but we will see other freshwater reservoirs. Keep in mind that the salt and the minerals that are in marine environments, like the oceans and the seas, really just come from the soil. And so the amount of time that water spends touching the Earth's crust is going to influence the salinity. Keep in mind that salinity is just ions, and those ions can affect how other molecules interact. So that would actually be an interesting time to go back and talk about enzymes and protein structure and being denatured. The carbon cycle we have talked a lot about indirectly. So when we're looking at the carbon cycle, we're going to see two main processes. Photosynthesis, which will remove CO2 from the atmosphere. When we talk about carbon, a lot of times we think carbon dioxide, but it will remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and put it into an organic molecule. And so that's what photosynthesis does, or chemosynthesis. Respiration is actually going to break down organic molecules and therefore release CO2 back into the atmosphere. Decomposition is another way to release CO2 from an organic form. Decomposition is a hugely important process. We do rely on decomposers. Keep in mind, decomposers are going to be bacteria, fungi, and some invertebrates, so some animals such as earthworms. And so we don't have a diagram of the carbon cycle, but we do need to keep in mind combustion. Combustion is actually one of the examples where humans have dramatically changed the cycle of matter. So when we look at how matter cycles, and we look at how carbon cycles, because burning a organic compound, such as wood or oil or coal, burning a carbon-based compound is going to release carbon dioxide into the air. And there's really no argument that even though there were fires and there was combustion on Earth before humans, we have dramatically changed the amount of combustion, and therefore we have pretty dramatically skewed the carbon cycle. Keep in mind that if we're cutting down trees for wood, or for whatever purpose, we're also reducing the amount of photosynthesis. Another important thing is do keep in mind that a lot of the photosynthesis that happens on Earth is actually happening in aquatic environments. And so we do need to really keep in mind that the carbon cycle is actually influenced by aquatic environments as well. As we go on next, we're talking about the nitrogen cycle. And the nitrogen cycle is one that we have not talked a lot about, so we want to spend a little bit of time here. Nitrogen is an essential element. It is needed by all living things. We do see it in nucleic acids, and we do see it in proteins. So it's an essential element. But it is not easily removed from the atmosphere. Nitrogen normally exists as a gas, a divalent, a two-atom gas. And so not many organisms can actually break that bond because it's a triple bond. And so only some organisms, mainly bacteria, are able to do what we call fixing. Now you might remember carbon fixation, so we take CO2 and put it into an organic form. Same thing here. Nitrogen fixation is where we put nitrogen into an organic form, and it's mostly going to be done by bacteria, and these are mostly going to be bacteria that live symbiotically or mutually with plants. So we do have a really important relationship between bacteria and plants, and they're mostly going to be living here in the roots. So most nitrification is going to happen there in the roots. And then we have to assimilate it, and this is why you need to eat sources of protein so that you can get your source of nitrogen. Overuse of the nitrogen cycle can happen if there's too much fertilizer. So it turns out that nitrogen is a limiting factor for plants. And plants won't always grow to their ultimate size if they don't have enough nitrogen. So farmers realize, well, if we give them everything that they need, they'll grow to their highest yield. And so nitrogen and phosphorus are both very commonly found in fertilizers, but the over application of fertilizer can actually lead to blooms in aquatic environments. So when we apply fertilizer, it doesn't stick to the grass. If it rains, it runs off. And we can end up with the nitrogen in the aquatic, and that's how you get all the green scum on top, and that can severely damage the aquatic ecosystems because you actually block the sun from getting to the deeper plants. The phosphorus cycle, we do just need to know that matter is cycled. So you should just be able to talk about the carbon and the nitrogen cycle most comfortably, but identify that all matter has to be cycled. It's going to be used and reused, and that's where decomposers really come into play. So the atoms that build up your body, where do they come from? Actually from what you ate. So eating not only provides us energy, but provides us with the raw materials. When we look at the next part, we look at the transfer of energy. The main source of energy for Earth is really going to be the sun. Some organisms are able to use inorganic compounds or energy that's coming from the thermal vents at the bottom of the ocean, but the main source of energy is going to be the sun. And it is sometimes called the flow of energy, because energy will be lost as heat. So if we think about our sources of energy, we have light energy that plants are able to use, we have radiant or physical heat energy, and then we have chemical energy in the bonds between atoms, the sharing or transfer of electrons. So when we look at how energy is transferred on Earth, we're mainly talking about food webs and food chains, but you do want to know where energy comes from, and that energy can be released and lost as heat. When we talk about food webs and food chains, keep in mind that they both always start with a producer. That producer does the first energy transfer, and that is when chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and accessory pigments are absorbing the wavelength of light from the sun and transferring it into an organic molecule that they either build their body with or that they then break down to use for their own energy source. Autotroph literally means self-feeding. Hetero means different feeding. Means they cannot self-feed, they have to get food and energy or organic compounds from other organisms. Heterotrophs can be broken up into categories which you know: herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores, depending on what they eat. Keep in mind adaptations, unity, they all have to eat, diversity, they have different ways. The 10% rule is very important. 10% of energy is gained. 90% in theory is lost, and this is lost as heat, this is lost as doing work. You think in the natural environment, in order to catch food, you have to run and catch it and tear it apart and eat it and digest it, and that takes a lot of energy. And so one of the unique things that we see is that as we move up a food chain, we have a very small number of top predators. The food web cannot support a lot of top predators because since only 10% of energy is transferred, they have to eat a tremendous amount of energy. And so you should be able to kind of calculate how much energy is gained and lost as we go through. 10% gained, 90% lost. And this leads us to the idea of productivity or producing. Gross primary productivity is how much a producer produces. But we have to keep in mind that sometimes they will use some of this. And so net primary productivity is how much is available for other organisms. So when we talk about productivity, we're really talking about producers and how much they're able to, how efficiently they're able to transfer energy from the sun into energy in organisms. Keep in mind that sometimes as a plant gets older, it's not able to have the same rate. And so you should be